Chapter 6. Imogen left the tavern before Gabe, figuring it would be nice for him to talk a bit with Bianca without her there. They'd been friends for a long time, longer than they were anything else, and Imogen didn't like that her arrival had put a wedge between the friends. The mountain road was winding and dark, and her charger hugged the curves. The roads had become familiar to her in the last few months, but Imogen figured it was time to trade in her vehicle for a four-wheel drive before the winter weather truly hit. She'd been lucky so far, but time and nature was not in her favor. She slowed as she approached the stone gates that led to Gabe's driveway. Imogen drove over the small bridge toward the house, which was lit up from the inside like a beacon in the night. No matter how often she came to Gabe's home, she was always amazed at how the large, wood-framed lodge could be so warm and inviting. It was situated in the center of a clearing, surrounded on four sides with heavy woods, broken only by the horse paddocks. The privacy was absolute and held a quiet stillness she'd come to associate with peace. Imogen parked in the driveway, but stilled when she caught sight of a shadow on the porch. It didn't move, but her instincts were firing. She left her headlights on and made sure the doors were locked against an intruder. Despite growing up in an affluent neighborhood, the other side of town was decidedly different and still had occasional shootings and robberies. She wasn't a fool, and her gut told her something was wrong. Leaving the car running, she used Siri to call Gabe. It went straight to voicemail. Shoot, she thought, hanging up. He must be out of cell range. She looked over at the paddocks and decided to wait for him to arrive. Fortune was pacing the fence, clearly agitated and on alert, but the Mustang seemed unbothered. It could be a predator looking for food scraps, but the horses were safe for now. She kept her eye on the shadow, which hadn't moved since she'd first pulled up. If it were an animal, it would have moved on at some point, searching for something or following scents. Imogen wished she had her pit bull with her. Big dog privilege would come in really handy right now. After about 15 minutes of nervous sweating, Imogen finally spied headlights coming down the drive. Gabe pulled up near her, giving himself room to maneuver around her car if necessary. He turned his headlights off and reached into his glove compartment. She couldn't see what for. Her phone rang. It was him. She answered quickly. Hello? What's wrong? She had to hand it to him. His instincts were on point. I pulled in and there is something or someone on your porch. They are hidden in the shadows. She heard a click. Stay where you are. Are your doors locked? I'm not an idiot. No, but I have to ask. I'm going to check things out. Don't get out, no matter what you hear. I don't want to have to worry about you. Gabe? She breathed out. Yeah, Jersey? Be careful. Always. Now, turn off your headlights. He disconnected the phone, and she immediately complied. Gabe must have turned off the interior light to his car because she didn't see or hear him get out. It was impossible to see anything. The moon was hidden behind the clouds. She bit her nails as she waited. When she didn't hear anything after a few minutes, she decided enough was enough. Fear for him wouldn't let her wait any longer. She opened her car's console and removed the taser that sat there. It might not bring down a bear, but it would give herself or Gabe a head start if they needed to run. Imogen took a page out of Gabe's book and turned off the interior lights so she could get out of the car without being obvious. The car door was heavy and made a loud snick as she closed it, causing her to wince. She crept up the porch stairs, keeping to the rail and ducking low. She felt like she was on a spy mission. This was definitely not in her comfort zone, but she wasn't about to leave Gabe without backup. The porch was silent. She peeked around the corner and was greeted with the nozzle of a gun. Yeesh, Jersey, I told you to stay in the car. She heard another click, and suddenly 2 arms were pulling her up the stairs and towards the door. Gabe looked furious. She'd never seen the hard look on his face before. His eyes were cold, and his hands were steel around her. I could have shot you. Imogen's heart was in her throat. What the hell, Gabe? You have a gun? I'm a Marine, Imogen. As if that answered her question sufficiently. She knew he'd been military. Hell, she knew that he'd definitely been through some dark things. He hadn't discussed them with her, but she saw the bags under his eyes and knew Harper worried about him too. Still, this was the first time she'd seen that side of him, and honestly, it scared her. He was so cold. The warmth she was used to seeing in his eyes was completely gone. It was like he was a completely different person. She shivered. He felt her tremor and loosened his grip, shifting her so she was slightly behind him as he addressed the shadow she now saw more clearly. It was distinctly human-shaped, tall and thin, but dressed in a black hoodie, jeans, and a leather jacket. Definitely clothing more appropriately suited to New Jersey, or a burglary, than the mountains. Imogen, meet Lopez. The shadow stepped forward slowly and deliberately, then lowered their hood. It was a woman. What was going on? The stranger was tall, almost 6 feet, and had dark skin, the shade itself unknown with the lack of light, but was devoid of emotion, matching her boyfriend. Realization settled in. You're military too. Lopez nodded, finally speaking. Sorry to scare you. I needed to speak with him. Imogen looked up at Gabe in silent question. She didn't like looking like an idiot, but she had clearly no idea what was going on. He was still, unnaturally so, not taking his eyes off Lopez. It made Imogen nervous. She was still lodged behind him protectively and didn't know what to make of it. This Lopez clearly was familiar with him, so why was he so on guard? Imogen was confused. Okay. She drew out the word. Was this something a phone call couldn't address? Lopez nodded again, saying nothing. Wow, she thought that Bailey was reserved with her words, but she had nothing on this person. It was like pulling teeth. She was really trying hard to defuse the situation, but there was a tension between Gabe and the woman that she couldn't pinpoint. He still hadn't said much of anything, and his posture was rigid as she peered around him, a wall of taut muscle. She couldn't tell if he was protecting her or trying to keep her away. Either way, why? Imogen decided to take herself out of the equation. This seemed like they had something to work out between themselves. Her being there would only complicate things. Clearing her throat, she tugged a little on Gabe's t-shirt, trying to get his attention. She felt his focus return to her, but he didn't turn his gaze away from Lopez. Gabe, I'm going to go home and leave you two to talk. He dipped his head toward her so she could reach up and kiss his cheek before backing away. When she got to the bottom step, she raced to the safety of her car, regretting ever getting out in the first place. She didn't know what history there was there, but clearly there was more to Gabe than the sweet, caring, shy man she'd come to know. A lot more, and she wasn't sure she was ready to find out. Gabe's instincts were on full alert. He hadn't seen Lopez since he was stationed overseas. She was a member of his squad, a strong hand-to-hand fighter with lightning-quick reflexes. Lopez favored knives, and he kept an eye on her hands. They hadn't been particularly close, but he had trusted her to have his back. That was a long time ago, though. There was no reason he could think of that would bring her to his doorstep late at night without a call or a heads-up. He didn't even know if she was still active duty. The situation itself was suspicious as hell. Thank goodness Imogen left. That was a complication he didn't need. She never should have left the safety of her vehicle. Thankfully, her instincts finally kicked in and she decided to remove herself from the situation. Until he knew what was going on, it was best to keep her out of things. He'd talk to her tomorrow. He'd been looking forward to some quality time with her this evening. It had been a tough day. But instead, he had this situation that could go foobar at any moment. So instead of cuddling up to his favorite redhead, his past was coming back to haunt him. Gabe sighed internally. His former squad mate stood there, silent and still, while he debated his next step. If she wanted to attack him, she'd had ample time to get the drop on him as he arrived. Instead, she was careful to move slowly and deliberately, with her hands out for him to see. Determining he was probably safe, at least for now, he made a decision with his gut. Let's talk inside. She moved aside to give him access to the door, but he wasn't about to turn his back on her yet. He kept her in his eye line, opened the door with one hand, and waved her inside with his gun hand, his finger off the trigger for now. She smirked and walked in, looking around at the spacious interior. You've done well for yourself. He ignored the comment. She didn't need to know any details of his life. He'd joined the military to earn money for college. He wasn't a lifer like some. This money had come from his parents, something he would gladly have exchanged in return for them being alive. Still, his old habits kicked in, and he found himself stuck in that fight mode with her arrival. Gabe didn't like how quickly he reverted. He directed her to the kitchen, where he offered her a stool. Standing on the other side of the island, he placed his Glock on the counter, facing her and within easy reach. Anita Lopez sat quietly while he observed her. The light brought a few details that he'd missed outside. Like him, there were circles under her eyes, but she was pale. Her dark skin carried an unhealthy pallor. He simply waited. He was a patient man. Clearly, she wanted something, or she wouldn't be here. "I need your help," she said with a sigh, her attempt at a power play over for now. Where moments before she was on guard, she now looked deflated, like all the air had been removed from her body. "Talk,"